There is a civilization you have never heard of, not because it was small, because the world decided to forget its name, and the only proof it ever existed is the smoothness of a stone surface where a human hand over decades wore a groove so deep that the fingerprints are still visible. We are standing in that groove right now. Most people know the Maya, the Aztec, the civilizations with calendar stones and pyramid temples and names that survived conquest. But before them, and this is the part institutional history tends to gloss over, there was something else. Something so thoroughly erased that we don't even have a name for it. We call it pre-classical, pre-columbian, pre-Maya. Every name we gave it is a name that means the thing before the thing we actually care about. It is like being defined as the draft before the finished painting. Except this draft lasted 3,000 years. 3,000 years is longer than the entire recorded history of Rome. It is longer than Christianity has existed. And for 3,000 years, across the swamps of the Yucatan and the highlands of Guatemala and the river valleys that cut through what is now Honduras and Belize, human beings were building, not haphazardly, systematically, with intention, with knowledge of astronomy and mathematics and hydraulics that should have made them unforgettable. And yet they are so thoroughly forgotten that most archaeologists didn't even begin seriously excavating their sites until the 1990s. We have had clearer photographs of the moon for 50 years than we have of the scale of their cities. Here is what we are learning. Underneath the jungle canopy, in the LiDAR data that shows what satellite imaging cannot, the radar maps that penetrate the leaf cover and reveal the ground beneath, we are finding cities. Hundreds of them, connected by causeway networks that span distances longer than some countries, with populations that rival medieval London, in places where 20 years ago archaeologists thought there was only forest, only wilderness, only the absence of civilization. But absence, it turns out, is not the same as emptiness. Absence is just what forgetting looks like from above. The first hard evidence came from a place called Aguada Phoenix. When the LiDAR images came back, high-resolution maps made by lasers bouncing off the earth from aircraft, the archaeologist Francisco Estrada Belli saw something that shouldn't have been there. A structure so large that it required ground-level verification to even believe the scan. The structure is roughly 3,000 meters long. That is nearly 2 miles. For scale, the Statue of Liberty is 46 meters tall. The structure at Aguada Phoenix is about 140 statues of liberty placed end to end, and it stretches across a valley. It was built around 1000 BCE. That makes it older than the first pyramids of Giza were already ancient, older than the alphabet, older than iron tools. But it was not a palace, not a temple, not a monument to a king. It was a causeway, a raised platform, and it leads nowhere that we can see, or rather, it leads to other structures that we are only now beginning to understand were cities. Entire cities that the jungle had swallowed so completely that colonial Spanish conquistadors walked directly through them without knowing they were not forest. The people who built Aguada Phoenix left no name for themselves, no dynastic inscriptions, no monumental texts. They built in stone. Yes, the hand-worn grooves still exist, still hold the warmth of the sun in their depths, but they did not carve their names, they did not declare victory. They built, and then somewhere around 400 BCE they dispersed. Not destroyed, we have no evidence of apocalypse. Dispersed, like morning fog lifting off a river. And what came after them was the classic Maya, whom we remember perfectly, whom we can name, whose calendar and mathematics and artwork survived conquest because conquest needed something to conquer. But between the disappearance of this unnamed civilization and the rise of the Maya, a gap of roughly 200 years, the land was not empty. LiDAR shows settlement patterns that suggest not collapse but transformation. Communities restructuring, knowledge migrating. The mathematical sophistication of the Maya, their zero, their vigesimal system, their precise astronomical calculations, these did not arise ex nihilo from genius. They inherited something from people they did not name, people whose names we cannot recover. This is the threshold where grief and revelation become the same thing, because what we are learning is not that a civilization was lost, it is that a civilization was erased. And the mechanism of erasure was simple. The next civilization was more interesting, more monumental, more nameable. So we looked at the Maya and saw a golden age, and we looked behind them and saw only the preliminary, the draft, the unnamed version. But the hand that wore that groove into the stone was not preliminary. That hand was real. That hand was skilled enough to do work precise enough that the grooves still exist 5,000 years later. That hand's owner knew something, had a method, belonged to a culture that had solved problems we still struggle with: water management in rainforest ecosystems, agricultural surplus generation in impossible soil conditions, mathematics sophisticated enough to predict eclipses, and that hand's owner never expected to be remembered. The work was the sentence they left. The smoothness of the surface is the only letter they needed to write, because this is what the unnamed civilization understood that we are only now relearning, that being forgotten does not mean you were not real, that leaving no name does not mean you left no trace, that the work you do can outlast the memory of who did it. The stone knows, the stone remembers. Your hand is still there, worn into its surface, warm in the afternoon sun, company for whoever comes after. This is what terrified us about being forgotten, and what has just become impossible to feel now that we know it happened to an entire civilization, and they were found again.